Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of Life Lessons in Combat Sports. I'm your host, as usual, Eric Hamidi, and so we're kind of getting a little bit back on track here because the subject matter of the episode I'm going to talk about today was what I was originally going to make episode 6 about, but I decided to make it a little bit of a tribute to Kevin Randleman, so now I will finally get to talk about what I originally planned. And what I've decided to do for this episode is basically the premise of it. I decided to do a wrestling themed episode because by the time this episode releases, I'll be going to, there's this wrestling company called AEW, and they have a pay-per-view at the Staples Center. Yes, I know it's a different name now, but it will always be the Staples Center to me. So they have a pay-per-view on March 9th, so by the time this episode releases, I will be going to that show, so I thought, let's match the occasion, and my next episode is going to be about wrestling. The wrestler that I'm going to talk about today is Bret the Hitman Hart, and anyone who is a wrestling fan knows who that is. He was a wrestler in the 80s, 90s, was in WWF for a long time, and won a lot of belts there. He was, and he wore pink. That's kind of what he was known for, with the sunglasses, the pink and black attack, and all that good stuff. So I'm talking about something that he mentioned that I feel like is a very good thing to take in mind for oneself, one's own life. And just bear with me a little bit here because I need to give a little bit of premise to the episode. So basically, like I said, Bret was a wrestler from the 80s and 90s, and he was in WWF from about 1984 until 1997. And what ended up happening was that he was going to leave for World Championship Wrestling at the end of 1997, and this is while he was still the WWF champion. So there was this whole, I guess, back and forth as far as how they were going to get the belt off him before he left and all this other hoopla. And the story that I'm talking about, it's called the Montreal Screwjob, and once again, if you are a wrestling fan, you know exactly what that is. And I'm about to get into what happened in there. So Bret's last scheduled pay-per-view was supposed to be Survivor Series 1997, which was in Montreal that year. So going into the match, Bret was going to defend his title against Shawn Michaels. And because there was this whole thing of, oh, he's going to WCW, we want to figure out how we'll get the belt off him before he leaves. But the problem is that the reason why there was such a convoluted back and forth was because Bret and Shawn really didn't like each other. They had personal beef with one another. So it wasn't as simple as, oh, hey, Bret's going to lose the title to Shawn. And it's like, no, I'm not. And Bret was, because of his animosity towards him, he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And eventually what they settled on as the plan was that it was basically going to be a no contest for their match. Like, well, from the best of my memory, what was going to happen is that Shawn Michaels was going to put Bret in the sharpshooter, and then Bret was going to reverse that, and then that was going to lead into a big brouhaha with their, stable mates, and like basically it would just be a DQ, and there would be no winner and all that stuff. And then the next day, Bret would basically vacate the title, and then he would leave and go to WCW. But the reason why it's called the Montreal Screwjob is because what ended up happening was that Shawn he locks in the sharpshooter, and Bret's in the motion of reversing it. But then as he's doing that, they call for the bell, and they declare Shawn the winner of that match. And this was unknown to Bret, because if you watch that clip, you see he's doing his part as far as what he thought the finish was going to be, but then all of a sudden you hear ding, 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 and then the match is over and they start playing Shawn Michaels music, and Bret is he's just on the mat just thinking, what the hell? What's going on here? So it was basically a double cross, a betrayal of trust and all this stuff. And that was a very sore spot for Bret for many years. And he wouldn't be back in the company for, well, he wouldn't work with the company again until 8 years later. And that's relevant based on what I'm about to tell you. So afterwards, Bret is in his locker room and there's a conversation slash confrontation that happens between Bret and the owner of WWE, WWF at the time, Vince McMahon. And he wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen. And he just, I mean, after a situation like that, you just are very uncertain about what's going to happen, or, you know, you don't trust anybody in that kind of situation. So the thing that happened was that there was this other wrestler named Rick Rude. He, once again, was another wrestler in the 80s and 90s who performed for WWF and WCW. I think he, to the best of my knowledge, he retired in the mid-90s into a more of a manager role, or just more of a non-wrestling role and all that stuff. And unfortunately, he passed away in 1999. But what happened was that Rick stayed in the locker room and basically had Bret's back, and basically made sure that nothing bad would happen to him. And it was like one of those things where, as far as comrades that Bret had during the conversation or the confrontation with Vince McMahon, Rick Rude was one of the only guys who was in the room with him, and he just wanted to make sure that nothing bad would happen to him and such. And it goes even a step further than that, because as it turned out, after that whole thing happened, Rick Rude also left WWF. And he ended up going to WCW as well. And he did that because he did that as a protest to basically what they did to Bret. He was so angry and so reviled by that he left the company in protest. And I guess it's kind of interesting because being an outside, looking at it from the outside perspective, I or nobody else can't truly grasp the significance of it, or the impact about it, or the impact of it, and how much it meant to somebody. We just can't grasp its true significance, but it meant a lot to Bret Hart. And the reason why I say that is because 8 years had passed from that incident in November of 1997 to when Bret actually was working with WWE again, and they worked together in 2005 to create a biographical DVD on him. That's actually a documentary, that's a DVD that I still have to this day. I think it's pretty good. So that was a big deal at the time. Unfortunately, I don't really feel like it got as much publicity as it may have if it was a different time, just because the Tuesday that episode was released, or sorry, the Tuesday that DVD was released was 2 days after Eddie Guerrero passed away. So that everyone's mind was on that when it comes to the wrestling world. But they ended up working out their differences and all that stuff to release this DVD. And one of the special features that they have on there is it's basically this tribute that Bret gives to his friends and colleagues in the wrestling business who passed away. It's actually a really touching piece. I mean, I think the music that they use for that is just really good. And it's really emotional. So Bret is talking about all these different people that he worked with. He's talking about his own brother, Owen Hart, who passed away in 1999 due to an accident that happened on a pay-per-view that honestly I feel like is another sort of lesson to take, and that's probably something I'm going to cover in a later episode. And he talks about Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. He talks about Davey Boy Smith and just a bunch of other people. And then he's talking about Rick Rude. And what he says in the DVD is that he says something along the lines of, I'll never forget what Rick Rude did for me. And after that, there's like a period of 15 seconds where he's just sitting there trying to hold back the tears. And he's just quiet for a moment as he's gathering himself. And then once he finally regains his composure, he says that he'll always be a hero to me. Which I guess that takes us to what the life lesson is, what the point of this episode is. So the point of it is you never really know how you impact someone based on either what you say or what you do. And in some ways, I don't know, I kind of feel as though as a friend, you have the ability to impact somebody in a significant way. And just what may seem like a very frivolous, or not frivolous, but what may seem like a minor thing to oneself may in fact mean the world to somebody else. And this can apply in a both negative and positive way, but I'm just trying to focus on the positives here. I think honestly, as a friend, that's such an important thing, is to, I guess now that I sort of think about it a little bit, also understanding that when you are somebody's friend, or you have a family member that you are really close with and all that stuff, I think you need to really grasp that what you do really impacts, and it really matters to them. Because as I mentioned earlier, what Rick Rude did for Bret was very important to Bret, and it meant so much. Honestly, now that I've kind of been thinking about this episode a little bit, and even before I started recording, I was just sort of thinking that the other kind of lesson to take from that whole Montreal screwjob situation with Bret and Rick Rude is to make sure that you have your friends, to make sure that you're there for your friends, to make sure that you protect them and you back them up and all that stuff. I guess that's kind of something that's become very important, and just something that you learn as you get older. It's kind of interesting that wasn't something that I originally thought I was going to talk about in this episode. It just sort of came up as you think about this. So I guess there's two instances of, I guess for me, I've kind of had two situations where the thing that Rick Rude did for Bret Hart, as far as leaving the company in protest or just looking out for him, and then also how Bret felt about that. There were two instances that I feel like are kind of similar to that, where one of them being, I got a new job several years ago, and it was a couple weeks or maybe a month into my tenure at the company, and one of my coworkers basically kind of let me know where things stood between me and another one of our coworkers of ours, and just basically tried to give me a heads up about that, just so that whatever kind of tense situation there was between me and, if I'm person A, my coworker who told me about that, person B, and then person C. Basically, person B is letting me know, hey, just kind of giving me a heads up and trying to look out for me to make sure that I don't make the situation with person C worse. So he told me about that, and to be quite honest, a friendship ensued from there. And I'm still friends with him to this day. So, I mean, that was a very big and significant moment that from there it spawned a friendship that still lasts to this day. So, I mean, I'm really grateful about that. So, that is the example of a friend of mine, of somebody having my back, basically. And then also, as far as how Bret reacted in his DVD when talking about what Rick Rude did for him, I kind of had a moment like that myself when I was in college and I studied film production, and we reached the point where we're doing our senior thesis project, and I'm tasked with a job that I had never done before. And as part of the curriculum, we all had to meet with the heads of our department to basically do pre-production about our project and stuff like that. And the job that I had was script supervising, which I had never done before. And while we're talking with the department heads and all that stuff, at one point, one of the heads of the editing option, she asks me, "You've done this before, right?" And for me, I'm a little taken. I mean, I was just confused about how to respond, because for me it was like I didn't want to lie and say yes, because then I would not have anything to back up that claim, or what would I say after that? And just, I feel like if I lied and said yes, eventually they would just figure out that I was lying. But I also didn't want to say no and have people be concerned that I couldn't do the job. And just basically, I mean, I didn't really know what was going to happen at the time, but I thought maybe if I had said no, then they would have, I don't know, maybe taken me out of that role, and who knows what would have happened or what I would have done on that project. So it all felt like it was so long, because these were the two options I was weighing in my mind, but it all happened so quickly in reality. So while after she asked me that question and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to say, that's when the other head of the editing department, he chimed in and he said, "Eric can handle it." And that basically kind of just, I don't know if put an end to the discussion is the right word, but there wasn't any follow-up after that, because he said that, like, and he was the instructor for some courses that I took in the film option anyway, so he knew who I was. So he said that, and I guess it was kind of like, once he said, "Oh, Eric can handle it," it was just like, okay, then everything's good, and then we can move on to something else. And that's really something that I'll always be grateful for. So to kind of tie this around, is that Bret, he has that very strong reaction, and just saying that because of what Rick Rude did for him, as far as watching out for him, or just leaving the company because of how they treated Bret, he said he'll always be a hero to me. And just when I think about that story for myself, I just think about how I'll always be grateful to him for doing that. And yes, that just meant a lot. And I've always been grateful that he did that for me. And the project ended up going well, or I ended up performing my job well and all that stuff. So it was all good. So how this kind of like, I don't know, this kind of how do I want to say this? It's just, this leads into just basically the larger theme of helping people when you can, and just, and I don't know, maybe it's kind of a tie into episode 6, but basically doing what you can to help people, because you never really know how that impacts somebody. And I guess I say all this stuff because in the past I've helped out friends who really needed my help, and it felt good to do that. It just, there have been times where there have been people who I really care about going through something and it's really hard. And for me, I wanted to be there for them and try to do what I can to help out. Just anything that's within my ability, or just whatever is feasible for me. And just because, I guess it's just because I cared a lot for said people. And I remember, I think of certain instances where that happened. I mean, honestly, I'm even thinking back to around 8 years ago where, I'm helping out a friend of mine with an editing project, or there's a friend of mine who just needs someone to talk to, and just, you know, even that spending of time just meant so much to them. So, and it's happened for me as well, where there have been times where, where basically the roles were reversed, where I really needed somebody to talk to, or I needed help with something, and my friends or my family members, they provided that for me. I don't know why I said that so loud. But they were there for me. And honestly, it's a really nice feeling. And I also think that doing that, and I feel very strongly about this, I feel like when you do that for each other, it creates a really strong bond and just brings you guys closer and connects you and all that stuff. And it's appreciated on both levels. They appreciate it when you help them, and I appreciate them for helping me out. And I guess the thing that I'm trying to emphasize with all this, I mean, I feel like I kind of need to say this. I know all of this stuff is not revelatory information and all that, but what I'm trying to do is just give an example of how something that maybe you think doesn't, you know, that is not a lot or is not of much substance, means everything to someone else. That's basically that's my whole point for saying all this. And I guess I say this because also it's a situation where I guess as I get older, I sort of think to myself, don't take your friends for granted. Cherish them, spend time with them, be there for them. And yeah, because I mean, human relationships or just relationships, and just our connection with people is how we get through stuff. And I guess that means a lot to me, because as I've gotten older, the idea of having friends and maintaining friendships and all that stuff, it just, it's gotten a lot more important to me as I've gotten older. And it's it's a little funny because the last episode I did, the Kevin Randleman one, I thought I was just going to be spending the evening editing it, but what ended up happening is that there was an impromptu hangout with a friend of mine, and basically what I did was that I sacrificed time that I would have. I sacrificed time to edit the project to hang out with my friend and be there for him, and just, I don't know. To me, I kind of, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like by hanging out with him after his other plans were done and all that stuff, it meant a lot and just almost made his night. So I'm happy I was able to do that for him. And then also the evening after that, I thought I was gonna spend time sorry. The evening after that, I thought I was gonna spend it editing as well, but what ended up happening was that somebody was going through a little bit of a tough time and was in a bad emotional state at that moment. So I took the time to just speak with him, hear him out. And this is also another important thing for me is to, if I'm going to talk to somebody who's going through something hard, I want to be able to give advice if I can. I won't, or maybe not give advice, but I want to provide something of value to that. Whether it's advice or sharing a personal story or a technique that could help them, whatever it is. That's what I want to do when I talk with people. I guess you could say that I took I took time away from editing to just be a good friend to them. And I would like to think that it helped out these individuals. And by taking the time to do that, it also created, I guess, a little bit of a bonding moment between both of them where it just, even the next day, one of them told me that, hey, I just basically along the lines of I really enjoyed that time and I really enjoyed hanging out and just I helped him out and all that stuff. So I think trying to be there for people is definitely, I think it's definitely something that, well, I mean, I'm trying to improve on that and do that where I can, but I think that's something that I need to be mindful of and just stay focused on and just keep doing that. And there are improvements I can make on that because I don't know. Maybe in the past I wasn't always the most like aware of that, but I guess as the years have gone on, and like as my 30s have played out, I've tried to be mindful about that. And it's even played out in the sense of just making sure that I see groups of friends more often or I hang out with them more often. I mean, it doesn't have to be this grand thing, but it's just kind of like even just taking the time to just do better at seeing them. Like for instance, if I have a friend group who's saying, "Hey, we're meeting here for dinner," and really just doing everything I can to make that. And just when there are instances like that, making as many of them as I can. So that's another way that this sort of motivation kind of like plays out. And I guess my hope for saying this stuff to everybody is just so that you can be mindful of this as well and also make sure that you can keep those strong connections with your friends, or just, I don't know, in a weird way, kind of letting you know how what you do impacts people. I don't know. And I guess maybe doing this, not even just doing this episode, but maybe also, and I guess I kind of said this in the last episode, but I feel like doing this podcast is kind of an extension of that as well, or it's just another manifestation of it, or what have you. So I guess it would make sense why I'm motivated to do this. I guess it would make sense why I feel like this is actually, like this whole podcast is something that I really want to do, and I make sure that I do regularly, because as I kind of said in other episodes, doing this podcast is a way for me to combine the love that I have for combat sports, but also to do something that can be, I guess, do something that can be helpful to people. I guess let's just keep it simple. Just taking my interest from just a lifetime of fandom and applying it to any kind of situation in life, or any kind of learning experience in life, just so that you can kind of see, I guess you can see a manifestation of it, or just see an instance of it, and just maybe even if it's something you hadn't thought about before, you learn about it. I don't know. I don't know. This whole endeavor means a lot, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I hope that this can be of value, and I hope that it's I hope it's useful. And it's kind of funny because I feel like there's I kind of feel like there's a lot of things that I haven't had a chance to talk about or say, but honestly, this episode's kind of a little longer than I thought it would be, so I'll probably just wrap it up. And honestly, there's future episodes I can talk about that deal with friendships or helping people that I guess I can just mention here if I realize I forgot. So in any event, that's all I have for you guys. As far as the next couple weeks, or basically, there might be a little bit of a gap in between when this episode is released and then the next one I do. It just kind of, because there's some work that I have coming up later in the month of March that I just need to prepare for and such. So that may take time away from me recording and editing and then releasing these episodes. But I don't know. We'll see how it plays out, because I could feel motivated to do another episode prior to when that job is done. It just kind of depends on how I feel. And this is one of those instances where I felt like I needed to make an episode. So that's why I'm going ahead and doing it. So I may do that. I may take a look. I mean, who knows? A lot of times when I make these episodes, I do it out of a need that I feel like I have, and it's a way for me to, I guess, get everything out, or just deal with the things that are happening in my life. So there may be a situation where in a week I'm all like, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to record an episode. But the point is, if there is a little bit of a hiatus of a couple weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, don't be surprised about that. But I don't know. We'll see how things play out. In any event, I've done enough yapping, so I'll let you guys carry on with your day. But thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode, and let me know what you think about it in the comments section. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.